Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order a regular meeting of the Dunbar Police Civil Service Commission. Today is December 2, 2024. The entirety of our commission is present. Doug Robinson, Chris Moyers, our clerk, Connie Faulkner. I'm Mark McMillan, and attorneys also present, Robert Schulenberg. Before we address our agenda items, I'd like to first recognize those in attendance who are city officials. First, I'd like to recognize Mayor Scott Elliott, Councilman Jim Hughes, Councilperson Sharon Haynes, Councilman Greg Wolf, Councilman Robert Yeager, Councilpersons-elect Sarah Sovine, Kara Prudy, and Councilman-elect Beach Reynolds. Are there any other members of the city government I've failed to recognize? Thank you. I'd also like to recognize Police Chief Garton and City Attorney Steve Swisher, both of them present. Okay, moving on to our agenda, there's first topic is the status of some investigative matters. Those of you who are familiar with some of our more recent endeavors will know that as of recent months, we undertook to investigate two substantial matters of suspected misconduct that resulted, believed to have resulted in the death of two individuals. The decedents in those cases were Michael Scott Jr. and Robert Hensley. And the common factor in both these cases were that there unfortunately two members of the Dunbar Police Department that were directly implicated there. And in short, the commission found it necessary to involve ourselves in investigating those matters because the mayor disclosed that while he had an interest in the facts of those cases, that he had requested from both the police chief and other subordinates in the department to have access to the files and the product of whatever investigations had been undertaken. And the members of the department had either failed or refused to supply those to him, and so using the investigative authority granted by the state code, we set out to try to get the information that he was having difficulty obtaining. So since then, that which we did obtain has been compiled along with a lot of information that was obtained from outside sources by Robert Schulenberg, who's a licensed attorney and long-standing former member of the Prosecuting Attorney's Office in Kanawha County, and currently serving as counsel to the commission and authorized by the City Council of Dunbar to serve in that capacity. So, that said, our notice and agenda items indicate that the investigation concerning the Michael Scott Jr. matter is completed, and we expected as of this meeting and as of the time this agenda was created that the Hensley matter would be completed as well, and I'm happy to report that it has been completed very recently. And so to that end, the Scott investigation produced a much more voluminous amount of evidence and documentation, including a lot of digital materials and printed materials. The page content, I believe, was over 400 pages. But a report based on that of some dozen or so pages was compiled by Mr. Schulenberg, and that was supplied along with the source materials to the mayor and the police department. And there was some apparent lack of understanding about how we intended that to be further distributed, and there was some delay, and I'll apologize for that, some delay in it reaching city council. But I think that clarification has been made, and we have sent to each of the council members a copy of the report, and by that I mean the basic report, and also indicated that city council members would be entitled to have the entirety of it. For that purpose, I'd like to refer members of council to the city charter that contains in section 17 a specific provision that says the council shall exercise all of the legislative functions of the city government, shall have the right to demand of any city official, comma, or employee information, explanations, facts, details, correspondence, or other papers affecting the city's interest, and it shall be deemed misfeasance and neglect of duty for any such official or employee to fail or refuse to comply with such demands. Well, I find that to be pretty clear and concise language that makes it incumbent upon any city official, as may be requested by council, a violation not to supply that information, plain and simple. So we intend to do that. The only thing we ask, because we do have the competing concerns of privacy, some of the people alluded to in these reports may be identified by dates of birth or something like that. To the extent that may be, those materials have to be redacted before any further dissemination can be made. And we will trust the city council, while they have the absolute right and entitlement to have this information, documentation, etc., that it be handled in manners consistent with those legal requirements. Now, I understand that, though, and I know at least one member of council has requested the backup information. Unfortunately, we gave the police department the originals of all the information that had to be scanned. They took it to the print office and had all that scanned and had it reduced to a digital form, which they have, but somehow so far we don't have it. So I can't give it to you until that's, and we understood from separate counsel for the city, not Mr. Switcher, another attorney, said that they were going to supply that list. We just don't have it yet, and I apologize for that, but the minute we have it, those of you who have requested that will certainly be provided with it. So before we move on to the next investigation, that being the Hensley matter, let me first ask if there's anybody that has any questions about that, because Mr. Schulenberg's here and he'll be happy to answer anything that's appropriate for him to answer in this forum. Well, okay. Then moving to the Hensley matter, as I indicated, that case wasn't, as of the time this meeting notice was formulated, wasn't complete, has been completed, and we can supply to the mayor, chief, and members of council. We can give that to you in paper form now, or while you're here, if somebody can burn the copies of it. So anybody that I've just mentioned that wants that copy can have that before you leave. So we'll make sure to do that. All right. Well, if anyone thinks of questions they may have concerning either of those investigations before you leave, we can take those questions up. We can return to that topic for that purpose. Okay, there's also, I noticed, I admit I haven't been good about doing this, but I've recently taken up reviewing council meetings after they've been conducted when I've been advised that there were matters attendant to our responsibilities that are discussed there. And I note that in the most recent council meeting, there was some discussion about a matter brought by Patrol Officer Winters in circuit court. And I heard that characterized as a lawsuit against the Civil Service Commission and against the city. Well, I suppose that's technically correct in the sense that if you bring an action against somebody of any type, it's technically a lawsuit, but that stated in that way sort of leaves a false impression. And just to be clear about that, those of you who are historically familiar with that situation, Officer Winters brought a grievance some time ago insisting that he had a right to be promoted from the rank of patrol officer to the rank of corporal. And he had been advised at that point he was not eligible because there were other officers that had scored higher on the test than he did. And he was there, that was the principal problem, but his heartburn with the whole thing was that he said that the test was designed for officers of greater experience and so forth, and therefore it was unfair to him. And another issue he had was that he was a part-time patrol officer that also worked for another police department that was a lieutenant in that police department, and that it was unfair for him to compete against a part-time police officer, in essence. So we first listened to his complaint in one of our regular meetings, and he was represented by counsel who couldn't stay long enough to complete the meeting, and the then police chief did not have counsel and was having difficulty getting counsel, and so the matter was continued generally, and at some point he demanded a ruling. Well, we wanted to give both parties a chance to have any further evidence or argument put on the record before we did that, but we determined that Commissioner Moyers contacted him and asked him for his new counsel's contact information, having understood that his former counsel had quit, and he said he would have his counsel contact us, but some weeks later that didn't happen. The city didn't inform us of any new counsel they may have. So in essence, we called a meeting. Nobody brought counsel. Nobody was prepared to have a hearing, though it was properly noticed. So we completed the matter and determined that in addition to his matters that he raised earlier concerning his eligibility were without merit, that his involvement in the death of Mr. Scott raised sufficient questions as to his fitness under the provision of the law that refers to that as a qualification for promotion, that he be denied that promotion. In the meantime, he had been promoted, but we rescinded that. So all that long-winded description goes to the point of saying this. If there's some abiding or remaining perception that the city has been sued by this officer. In the ordinary sense of that, the city has not been sued, nor has the commission. He has brought an action styled 5 different ways. It's a declaratory judgment action, a direct appeal, a petition for writ of prohibition, and petition for writ of mandamus. So 4 different ways, the object of which is all singularly to get his rank to corporal back. He makes no claim for money damages or any other relief. He wants to be a corporal again. That matter is set to be heard in the Circuit Court of Kanawha County on December 13th, I believe. And Mr. Schulenberg will be there to argue on behalf of the commission. The city has their own counsel who will represent their interest. And again, not to burden our session here today with all that unnecessarily, I just want it to be clear and that there be no false perception that the city is in any jeopardy whatsoever of there being any damages assessed against the city, the commission, or anybody else. And so, that said, that should resolve that. Okay. Anybody have any questions about that at all? Okay, so the next matter on our agenda is the compliance, or perhaps more appropriately stated, the lack of compliance to certain of our subpoenas ducas tecum that were issued to the former chief of police, former acting chief of police, Owen Barker, and I don't see him here today, so I guess he maintains no interest in it. But we issued a number of subpoenas for records of the department concerning investigations they were conducting, not the least of which, in terms of importance, were both this Michael Scott and Robert Hemsley investigation, as well as some other cases where there had been the complaint of excessive use of force. And in essence, what we were told, and our records will reflect specifically, that these records were voluminous and had been maintained in such a way that they weren't singularly kept as a one-unit file, that it was throughout the offices of the department, and it would take weeks to assemble and produce. And so over the following weeks, the commission patiently waited and asked with each successive meeting for those records. And we got some records, but even to this date, there are a good number of those records that haven't been produced. Okay, so the case that or the situation that invokes is we have an officer that apparently testified that this impediment existed because of the state of the records and how they were stored and filed, etc. So we sort of looked behind that and did a secondary sort of investigation to determine the accuracy of that. And we heard from several witnesses and people that had direct knowledge, including the retired Captain Matt Arthur, who was the executive officer at the time and tasked with maintaining those files. And he said very pointedly that the records were not filed like that. They were kept in a very cohesive way, and they were not only filed in hard copy form, but there was a separate file exclusively for a digital form of those records, and that if anyone said anything different than that, that was completely inaccurate. So we have, you know, stories that are completely inapposite, and it's a tragic thing when somebody in the position of as an acting police chief is said things that are allegedly inaccurate, and so the question becomes then, well, what's the remedy for that? Or is there a remedy due for something like that? And I personally feel like that, you know, this isn't something that our city can just brush aside and look to it as something undeserving of any accountability. So, the department has the option to take action as it feels appropriate by that, but because there's the implication of an officer having under oath testified untruthfully, that there's a duty of the city to disclose that in appropriate circumstances. Particularly, the authorities in West Virginia and nationwide require that if a police officer is going to be a witness in a case in connection with his official duties, those whom he will be testifying against have the right to know about any such matters that would reflect upon that officer's credibility. And that's, for those of you interested in looking it up, it's has its derivation in Brady versus Maryland, which is a federal case, and then the case of it's United States versus Giglio, typically referred as the Giglio case. And in West Virginia specifically, there's authorities that say under a case called Youngblood that if an officer has such problems in his conduct background, or there's any exculpatory evidence that exists within the knowledge of the police department, that knowledge is imputed on the prosecutor, whether he knows about it or not. So the easiest way to sabotage an important investigation would be to have an officer that has something, some event like this in his background, and not disclose it to the prosecuting attorney, who could then make the appropriate disclosure forward. So, unfortunately, it's my feeling, subject to being proven wrong, that the city now finds itself, unfortunately, in that predicament that you've got an officer that's testified untruthfully, and that becomes an issue that has to be disclosed in the appropriate ways to the appropriate people. So, anybody have any thoughts about that they'd like to express? Well, we're going to continue to explore that to a conclusion. And finally, we want to discuss another matter. Unfortunately, we seem to be consumed with these issues of potential misconduct. Some time back, and the exact dates escape me, we're still trying to get hold of some of the paperwork concerning this, but in recent months there was, I'm going to call it a collection of police officers, a handful of police officers that had some heartburn with the mayor, and they decided that they wanted to do an end around the mayor and have an audience directly with council. And precisely how it was organized, I don't know. I'm getting much of this second, third hand, so maybe those present members of council who have direct information about this could enlighten us, but this small nucleus of officers apparently made direct contact with City Council and indicated their interest in having a meeting directly with Council. And among their, I don't know if there's some published agenda or some listing of their things they wanted to discuss, but one of the things they wanted was sort of a self-styled insurrection designed to initiate efforts to remove the mayor from office. Well, this is troubling for a couple reasons. First of all, you know, in West Virginia we have the Open Governmental Processes Act, which means that we live by an open government requirement. No government at any level can just simply meet in secrecy with these unpublished agendas and such as that. And for police officers to induce something like that can only be viewed as potentially some severe type of misconduct. And second of all, you know, the statutes in West Virginia relating to civil service specifically preclude certain matters whereby an officer engages in political activity. And the policy behind that is police officers should be free from political influences, political control, or things by which their performance as a police officer is guided or influenced by political considerations. So for both of those reasons, we intend to try to get to the bottom of that, what happened, who was involved, and so I don't want to put anybody on the spot directly. However, I do note that there's some commission members here. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share about that while we're here today? Well, I can understand if you don't want to do that in an open meeting, although I would encourage you to call me. I'll get you in touch with Mr. Schulenberg. He's going to continue to pursue that matter as we go. Okay. So that concludes the new business or the matters that we want to discuss. Again, I'm happy to either ask Mr. Schulenberg to answer your questions about any of these matters that he's in charge of investigating, or if anybody would prefer, I'm happy to ask him to give you a quick summary of those. Anybody have a preference or an idea?
Summary would be nice.
Okay, well then, and pardon me, what's your name?
Kara.
Okay, yes. All right, so with that question in place, would you mind, Rob, just giving Kara a summary?
I'll start off with the Scott matter. Excuse me. With respect to the Scott matter, there are a number of records I reviewed. There was the report of the Kanawha County Sheriff's Department. There was the audio and video of the body-worn cameras of Patrolman Zachary Winters. There was the audio and video of the body-worn cameras of Adam Mason, the lieutenant. And there was booking video from the City Police Department, as well as the booking area of the South Central Regional Jail, video of the Dunbar Police Station, reports of the booking staff at the regional jail, the ambulance run reports of the City of Charleston Fire Department and the Kanawha County Emergency Ambulance Authority, an internal affairs report by then Captain Arthur, report of the post-mortem examination by the medical examiners. So there was a lot of information there. That was also information that apparently had been presented to both the prosecuting attorney of Kanawha County and the in some form or other to the United States Attorney. There were certain rules, and I also reviewed the rules and regulations of the Dunbar Police Department. Specifically, the way I looked at it was in the application of the rules governing the use of force. Specifically, there is decisional law that has been somewhat incorporated in the Dunbar Police Department rules and regulations about the use of force. The outstanding case in the federal system is Graham v. Connor, the 1993 U.S. Supreme Court case. And also there's West Virginia State Police versus Walker, which adopted the Connor standard for the West Virginia Constitution. The severity of the crime is the first factor that's to be considered. The second factor is whether the suspect posed an immediate threat to the officers or citizens if he escaped. And third is, was he actually attempting escape? When we look at the case where Mr. Scott, the first issue is the severity of the offense. He was being arrested on an outstanding bench warrant from the municipal court for possession of a controlled substance and a misdemeanor trespass. As far as crimes go, those are not what you would call serious crimes where there's a substantial risk of danger. It's not like he was running away from an armed robbery or burglary, or he'd done something offensive, such as breaking windows. He had just failed to appear for a non-jailable trespassing offense and possession of a controlled substance. You look at the size, folks aren't, I don't know how well folks are aware of the relative sizes, but Officer Winters is a pretty strong guy. I believe he was in the Marine Corps. Mr. Scott, according to the post-mortem examination, was 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighed 116 pounds. Basically the size of a 6th grade girl. You know, and what happened was Officer Winters, he said that Scott was trying to evade him, trying to run away from him. But he had him he was already handcuffed behind his back, and he had hold of the handcuffs. When he said he was trying to evade him, he was able to grab him around the waist. But what happened was, after that, Mr. Scott was picked up and slammed headfirst into the asphalt of Park Street, the 900 block of Park Street, or Park Drive, I think it is. So, when you're evading, yes, he was evading an arrest, maybe, or else, remember, he was well, folks don't know it, but he was under the influence of drugs, according to the post-mortem exam. So it could have been he was losing his balance. The video's not good on that, because Dunbar doesn't have car video. We don't know. That also plays a part in the Scott case, or excuse me, the Hensley case. But whether he was trying to escape from custody or not, considering he had his bag of clothes and belongings there on the street, he would have had to have somehow gotten away from a policeman, scooped him up and run away. And I don't think that'll happen. The other point was that yes, he was attempting to escape, but where was he going to go? At midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning on Park Drive, not a lot of places you can go. He's a street person. They'll get him sooner or later. And again, it was only trespassing and possession of a controlled substance. When you're measuring the severity of the crime in this case, trespassing and controlled substance and failure to appear, that level of force, head slamming him into the asphalt of the road surface, seems a little excessive. However, when you look at it also with respect to the aftermath, you hear him saying, Winters saying on his body-worn camera at the regional jail. He used the word suplex. I suplexed him, which is a wrestling move that doesn't fit. A wrestling move that's a suplex, you grab the guy around the waist, pick him up, and slam him backwards over top. This was just what we would call a pile drive, if you want to use that term. But he told several people, and it's in the reports from the nurse at the regional jail and 2 of the correctional officers at the regional jail, that he slammed him into the road surface. Additionally, Lieutenant Mason was arriving at the scene where Officer Winters had him in custody, or was attempting to take him into custody. And as Mason rolled up and got out of the car, he observed the events, and after it was over, he said, I saw him, I saw you, that he was trying to get away from you, and I saw you slam him. So, but then he contrasted to when I read the internal affairs report prepared by Captain Arthur. It went from, I saw you slam him, I suplexed him, I slammed him, to he was placed on the ground. So there's a problem in my mind. As a lawyer, if those folks were testifying, that would be a serious impeachment question, and it'd also be a serious question for the jury to weigh in credibility if that issue ever came up. But slamming versus placed him on the ground, that's a material difference in my mind between the events that were described, because we can't tell exactly what happened because we don't have car video, and the car officer's video is not clear. The body-worn camera video is not clear. But going from slamming to placing, there is a distinct difference between that. And I tend to believe that there was a slamming, because people, when they're excited, they make what's called an excited utterance. And evidence under the law in this state as well as in the federal system is that when it's an exciting event, which when Lieutenant Mason says, I saw you slam him, I believe that. Because that is he doesn't have an opportunity to manufacture something. He's not thinking about it, what he's going to say. He's saying what he saw. In legal terms, it's called an excited utterance. We have that issue. And then there's a question in the police report that Captain Arthur prepared about converting from slamming him, suplexing him, to placing him on the ground, meaning Mr. Scott. How did that come about? We hear later, when Officer Winters was at the Dunbar Police Department, he gets a call from a registered nurse at the emergency department. The registered nurse at the emergency department is trying to figure out how Mr. Scott was injured. What was the mechanism of injury? What happened? And you hear Officer Winters say, I placed him on the ground. You know, they're asking the question, the nurse is asking the question for a medical reason. They want to know the nature of the injury. They want to know the mechanism of injury so they can help treat and perhaps save the life of Mr. Scott. Unfortunately, Mr. Scott's life was not saved. Unfortunately, he died as a result at the hands of events which were by the Dunbar Police Department. There are other things that strike me through that. There are a couple other things too that strike me. That was only the event that resulted in Mr. Scott's being injured was the second encounter that Officer Winters had and Lieutenant Mason had with Zachary Scott. The first event was about 15 or 20 minutes before that by the Mountain Mission Church parking lot. There at the beginning of the event, we don't know exactly what happened at the beginning of the event because Officer Winters didn't activate his body-worn camera. Lieutenant Mason arrived there, and Lieutenant Mason did activate his body-worn camera. So we see the nature of the encounter between Michael Scott and Officer Winters there, which was more of a friendly encounter, I guess you'd say, in relative terms. But then you go to the encounter up on Park Drive where the injuries occurred, and it's vulgar. Now, I'm not going to use the exact words, but there are a lot of MFers and a lot of F words, a lot of F-bombs being thrown around, which if a citizen was walking by or driving by, although they probably wouldn't be at midnight, if someone was looking at that, they would be alarmed. It was as though I felt, in my opinion, based upon my review of the body-worn camera and the events, was that it was kind of a personal affront to Winters, because Winters made some comments to Mr. Scott down in front of the Mountain Mission Church. I don't want to catch you slipping. And people who do what you do, and the context was going into an open garage to look around and see if there was things. People get hurt doing that. Was that a foreshadowing of what was going to happen 15 minutes later? I think that's a pretty fair conclusion someone can make, and it's a fair conclusion for someone to think the other way. But when you look at the demeanor of Officer Winters on the video, it was like it was a personal affront to him. It was like he was taking it out on Mr. Scott for being a drug addict, for being whatever Mr. Scott was. And I don't know that there's a place for that in modern police work. You're not the judge, jury, and executioner out there. The policemen are not the judge, jury, and executioner. They're the people who gather the facts, report the facts to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor determines whether it's in municipal court or circuit court. The prosecutor determines what should happen, and a judge or a jury makes the ultimate determination of guilt or innocence. Guilt or innocence is not determined on the street. Does that? And there's a report that's prepared that was given to all the members of the city council. I'm sure if you ask the commission, they can provide it. I'm the lawyer for the commission. I don't have any authority to decide what to give out and what not to give out. But that's just if you want to see a copy of it, I don't think there'd be a problem with your contacting the commission and asking them for one. Now on the Robert Hensley case, that case involved a pursuit which resulted in the death of Robert Hensley. Robert Hensley was driving a motorcycle. Admittedly, he was under the influence of fentanyl, methamphetamine, recreational pharmaceuticals. But there was a high-speed chase through Dunbar, not only on Fairlawn Avenue, but also through various streets that were, at the time, 2:15 in the afternoon. There were people on the streets, there was traffic. Fortunately, school was out, particularly up in the area of Cross Lanes where the pursuit ended. So there weren't kids out on the street. There weren't it wasn't on a Sunday, so there weren't, or Wednesday evening, so there weren't churches in session. But there was still, anyone who's driven through cross lanes at 2:15 in the afternoon knows that there's still a fair amount of traffic on Cross Lanes Drive. But they were driving down Fairlawn Avenue, speeds over 100 miles an hour. At one point, you hear on the body-worn camera that the speeds were, the police unit that Winters was driving maxed out at 119 miles an hour. The motorcycle was not getting away. At this point, Officer Winters was on, I believe it's called stage 4, level 4 supervision. He was under field training. So he wasn't, he was still under field training, he wasn't fully free, but Lieutenant Mason was the field training supervisor, and my understanding of level 4, or phase 4 field training, the field training officer is a ghost. He's not there, he's supposed to be there. At the same time, Lieutenant Mason was also the shift commander. He was responsible for Officer Winters and another officer who were working in Dunbar at the time. So it was his call on certain aspects. At the time, the pursuit policy did permit the pursuit of motorcycles. The speeds were high, driving through occupied streets. In other traffic, though, there was a significant risk of danger. The records that were reviewed were the traffic crash report prepared by the Sheriff's Department, the incident report prepared by Officer Winters, the internal report by Captain Arthur, the rules and regulations of the Dunbar Police Department, the audio recordings of Officer Kendall were also reviewed. Kendall was the third officer on duty at that time in Dunbar. He did not undertake the pursuit because his police unit was disabled during the course of the early events of the pursuit. Audio recordings of Winters' body-worn camera, statements by Winters and Mason given during the internal investigation, and a post-mortem examination of Robert Hensley. One thing to note was that on the information, the report of the incident was that there appeared to have been, or at least it was listed in the items that existed, a car automobile cam for car 50 of the Dunbar Police Department. However, when we requested that no longer existed. The car camera versus the body-worn camera would be of significant importance because the car camera would see what the traffic is. When you're wearing the body-worn camera, barely sees above the steering wheel and the dashboard. So we can't tell from the body-worn camera what the road conditions were, what traffic was on the road. That comes from the cruiser camera. And the cruiser camera apparently no longer exists, although it was listed on the report as an item of exhibit. The other thing that's important is that under the pursuit rule, the supervisor is the person who tells whether the pursuit will continue or should be cut off. And the supervisor is supposed to maintain a concern for public safety, and the supervisor is also supposed to be kind of a neutral and detached arbiter. The pursuit began because Mr. Hensley's motorcycle on the corner of the license tag where the registration sticker is was bent and they couldn't see it. So they were pursuing a guy 119 miles an hour down Fairlawn Avenue and up Golf Mountain Road and at high speeds through the city of Dunbar streets where pedestrians and cars were traveling over a minor traffic infraction. A minor traffic infraction, let me find it in here under their pursuit rules. It says you don't chase those people. Pursuits are to be monitored by the supervisor, and the rule covers the termination of the pursuit, imposing a duty on the officer to continually question whether the seriousness of the crime and other factors justify continuation of the pursuit. Additionally, a rule says that for pursuits in misdemeanor cases, which having a license plate with a bent corner so you can't see the registration tag, is that generally equipment registration or license violations do not justify the hazards of a pursuit. That's in the Dunbar Police Department rules. It's not my thinking, it's just a black letter law as written by the City Police Department and as I understand approved by the City Council. So, the other thing is, so there was no real reason for that pursuit. And Mr. Hensley was a resident of the city of Dunbar. And Officer Winters and other officers had contact with Mr. Hensley before. So maybe they didn't know it was him, I don't know. But the bottom line is, the guy's out there riding a Honda motorcycle, they'd recognize him and be able to come across him again. The other thing is, deals with the supervision. Supervisors are required to continually determine whether or not a pursuit is necessary and whether the risks involved in continuing the pursuit justify the continuation and the risk of danger to not only the person you're pursuing and not only the officers in the pursuit, but the public, the other motoring traffic out there, pedestrians on the street, people in their houses. I've seen police wrecks where, in one of my former lives, where cars have left streets and gone through houses. That's not an uncommon occurrence, particularly when you're in an area like in the city of Dunbar, where there's not a lot of margin between the road surface and houses. But I think I say it here, Adam Mason was not wearing a body-worn camera, or at least we didn't get the video from him, if he was wearing one. But Winters had his on all the time, so we know what the audio was. Basically, in my mind, Adam Mason abandoned his position as a supervisor and became a cheerleader. And speeds were crazy. The other thing that strikes me is that this happened later at the Dunbar Police Department while an officer had his body-worn camera on. They're talking about, I'm not going to use the vulgarities involved, but when you have your first kill, you can get weird. These guys were not talking with any sympathy toward Robert Hensley. Like, God, that guy. Oh, one other thing that just struck me. They were up there looking to see whether or not the motorcycle was stolen, but it wasn't. We can't believe, when it was all over, they said, we can't believe a guy's running over a bad registration. but he did. They should have had enough sense to back off. But when they're talking about this case, and it's on their body-worn camera in the Dunbar Police Department sometime after the crash, where Mr. Hensley was killed, you have your first kill and you get all weird and stuff. You know, it showed to me that there's almost a callous disregard for the life, safety, and health of people. Not only the citizens of Dunbar, but also the guy they were chasing. A guy that the rules and regulations of the City of Dunbar Police Departments, they're sworn to protect just as much as any other citizen in the state. Anyone else. But they weren't doing that. My reports, my summaries are available through the Civil Service Commission, should they choose to release them. I work for them, so that's my quick summary of it.
If I can just quickly add to this lady's concern. One thing I didn't hear, I think you inadvertently jumped over it. In the first instance where Mr. Scott perished at the hands of the police, the medical examiner's report specifically identified the injury as a fractured skull and subdural hematoma, which is clearly and exclusively the product of this slamming his head into the concrete. There's just, you know, where among the things that can't be determined, that's simply not one of them. It's determined with absolute certainty. That's how the injury occurred, when it occurred, and that's what killed him, period. And so, anyway, does anybody have any questions about Mr. Schulenberg's summary of these facts and events?
Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am. So, anyway, we all this information is being committed to the city for its consideration and actions that it chooses to take. Obviously, the appointing authority that the code refers to and the removing authority all embraced within Article 14 of Chapter 8 relating to police departments. In some city governments, that's exclusively the mayor. Sometimes in this case of a firefighting service, it's exclusively the fire chief. It depends on how the city's organized and chartered. In the case of Dunbar, the city council bears the greatest responsibility for those things. It's one of those municipalities where appointment of officials has to be sanctioned as would removal from office from employees. So I don't pretend to interfere with the decisions made between council and the city administration, but as has been said, but bears repeating, we stand ready to supply everyone with the sort of information they need to make those very important decisions. I will finish by saying that if I haven't said it already, there has been also some concern about the city's liabilities in these cases, and there are a number of cases, unfortunately, that the city continues to be confronted with concerning police misconduct. But these particular cases, the city has already settled with both of these people. In the Hensley and Scott case, it was, or rather in the Scott case, as to the two officers implicated, $2 million. And where Hensley was concerned, it was something north of $300,000. So that's, we know not that economic impact has any proportional relationship with loss of human life, but if you want to look at that aspect of it, it's a lot of money paid, and it sort of causes, I think, anybody to wonder, wait a minute, if particular conduct costs the city that much money, either directly through its insurers, is that the thing where the officer, is it appropriate for that officer to completely escape accountability? And so that's what, we'd encourage the city to look at very closely, and we stand ready to react to whatever the city chooses to do as a response to that. So, okay. Are there any other issues that we've covered here that anyone has any questions, comments, concerns that they'd like to address the commission? This doesn't have anything to do with the topics that we've covered concerning these conduct issues, but do you have our minutes from that? We're going to conclude our meeting by review and approval of our last minute's meeting, but we can do that after we conclude this segment. Is there anybody else that has any questions, concerns, comments, anything like that? Okay, I'm gonna, our last minutes are 26 pages long and fine print, so I'm gonna move that we go into recess to do this so we don't hold this entire group hostage here. So that said, I move we go into adjournment and resume with that afterwards. So we stand adjourned. Okay, well, the reports, the second one, no, the second one hasn't been. Good to see you.